Hello, art historians. Here we are back for our last episode of the Baroque. And so when I get into the last episode of the Baroque, I talked to you about the most famous Baroque Catholic artist, Caravaggio. Talked to you about the most famous Baroque Catholic sculptor, Bernini. And now I need to talk to you about the most famous Baroque Protestant painter. And so when you're looking at that, what we want to talk about is we want to talk about Vermeer. And when we talk about Vermeer, we really want to talk about the fact that he is the master of light. He is the master of interior scenes. Everything Vermeer painted was an interior scene, with the exception of two in his entire, of history of painting things. Everything but two of the things he did were interior scenes, genre scenes. And he is super, super famous, probably most famous for this piece. Okay. Most people know this piece. This is probably his most famous piece. And when I say he is the master of light, look at the reflection off that pearl earring. Look at the reflection off of her eye. Look at the reflection off the corner of her mouth. And you see that that's a single white dot. That is a single white dot. He was able to create just these beautiful compositions. But the one we are going to study, we are lucky, is located at the National Gallery of Art in DC. And when we go on a field trip, that's where we will definitely go and see it. We have Johannes Vermeer, 1664. We're still dealing with the repercussions of the Reformation. Now we have a little bit of oddness here, which is he's Dutch, lived in Amsterdam, and or did he live? I'm not sure he lived in Amsterdam. I just said that, but I think he lived in. I think he might have lived in Ghent. So I'm just gonna keep talking. Anyway, while he lived in a predominantly, nope, he lived in Delft. See, I knew I would get it. Sorry. While he lived in a predominantly Protestant area of the world, he and his wife were Catholic. And that was okay. They didn't mind, having the Catholics around, but it does have a little bit of an impact on some of his art. And I bring that up because it has an impact in this one. So it's interesting that Vermeer's studio had this window off to the left, and many of his paintings are created in this particular room, set around this particular window. And in the back, you can even see the black and white tile floor and this table are present in many of his works. And so Vermeer has a particular style. There are very few Vermeers in existence. I think he only painted like 36 or 37 in his entire life. So they're very rare. The light is always from that window on the left. And they're sort of quiet, everyday life scenes. But remember, I talked to you about this earlier when we're dealing with the Baroque and we're dealing with Protestant Baroque in the North, we're dealing with art that has a sort of that secondary lesson, that lesson on morals. And so what we're looking at is a woman with a balance, woman holding a balance. And what she's doing is she is weighing, balancing things. That she's waiting for the balance to come to a rest so that she can see which side is heavier. And she is from a merchant family. And we see here in the background that we see pearls and we see jewels and things like that. I'm going to zoom in. So we see her with the balance. There's that little dot of white and there's that little dot of white. We see some gold coins. We see some pearls here. She has on a beautiful fur coat. And so she is doing some kind of balancing, weighing for selling things. But that is, as we talked about, that is sort of symbolic. So we see her, she has on this beautiful coat. It has a fur lining. We can tell that she is very wealthy. There are coins and pearls. There's more fabric off to the side here. We see the beautiful floor and the beautiful painting in the background. And the box that you see in front of her, the little tiny box, not this box with all the pearls in it, but this little tiny box, right there, would have had the weights that she would have put on here to weigh the gold coins or the pearls or whatever. So we see all this beautiful artwork. Look, I want you to look at the painting in the background. See that there's the light shining off of the gilded frame on this side, but this side is in shadow. Just so much attention to detail in everything that Vermeer did. He painted for the merchant class. He didn't paint for the church. So because he painted for the merchant class, he had a little more freedom in what he's doing. But remember, he was painting for the merchant class who are deeply religious, but don't need their religion smacking them in the face like a statue of Saint Teresa. Okay. So what are we looking at? Well, the focal point, the most important piece in the whole picture is the balance. And that is it's a real balance, but it's also a metaphorical balance. It is that balance between finding the balance between good and evil, finding the balance in your life between making money, being a merchant, and your faith, finding the balance in your life for the spiritual and the physical, finding the balance in your life for the church and home. So that is why this balance is here. And when you look behind you, you are going to see one of our favorite pictures. It is a picture of the Last Judgment. And you see Christ in judgment, and you see the blessed and the damned. And so when we're looking at this, we are able to see in the background, we are able to see Christ judging the damned and those that are going to heaven while she is holding the balance, right? Because if you don't find the right balance between your wealth and your religion, between your spiritual and your physical, if your balance is off, bad things will happen. And so her head divides that painting into heaven and hell. Here we see the people descending into hell, and here we see the blessed rising into heaven. Here we see her balancing, finding that balance. And so she is waiting for the balance to come to rest. This is a moment where we're catching it in a particular moment. And she is assessing, she is looking at the balance. It is an important moment as she looks at this, what seems like a simple everyday occurrence is actually metaphorical of a much larger decision that you have to make. And so that is sort of the difference between, think about the difference between Caravaggio, The Calling of St. Matthew, and Vermeer, Woman Holding a Balance. They are both important moments. They are both about faith. They are both about morals and choices. It is how they go about them that is different. The Catholic South is the in-your-face, the calling of St. Matthew. The Protestant North is a much softer lesson in good and evil. Same time period, same message about faith, but the way that it is presented is very different. And so if you really want to contrast the Catholic South with the Protestant North, what you want to do is you want to compare the Calling of St. Matthew to the Woman Holding a Balance. That is the difference. That is, when you look at Baroque, that's it. Those, if you could only pick two pieces from all of Baroque, those are the two, because it really shows you how the Protestant North and the Catholic South are both accomplishing the same thing, a focus on faith, but the way they go about it is different. So there you go. Woman Holding a Balance, Vermeer. It is an amazingly stunning beautiful piece of art that is right here in DC. And any chance you have to go see it, because it is, his ability to paint is unrivaled by pretty much anyone. It is fabulous. All right, here we go. Moving on. Okay, so remember that while we're doing Baroque, we're talking about things that are sort of over the top and an appeal to your senses and a bold use of color and use of light and dark and all of that stuff. Like it's extravagant in its like, look, Saint Teresa is over the top, right? But that's for a religious reason. At the same time that Baroque is over the top for the religious reason, we have King Louis XIV being over the top because he can be. And our next work that we're going to look at is the Palace of Versailles. Okay, it is a 2,000-acre complex. So I always try to put this into perspective. If you know those houses off Sweepstakes, or you know those houses off of Preakness, 4 of them usually make up an acre. So 8,000 houses, right? It's ridiculous. The average house has between 2,000 and 3,000 square feet in it, like of living space. This has 721,000 square feet. I mean, it's a ridiculously large place. And what is important as we look at this and will become like so important is the idea that the creation of this house with the square footage of like 250 houses or something like that, the creation of this ends up being partially responsible for the French Revolution. And that seems like a very bold statement, but I'll get there. All right, so Versailles, you have 2 architects. You have Louis Laveau and you have Jules Hardon-Mansart. If you only remember one name, just remember Laveau. Versailles, Laveau. Like, try to remember that all the L's and the V's and just pick one. So it says here that it was begun in 1669, and then there's no end date because it continued to be added onto even up through like into the early 1900s. And now it's a museum. So let's talk about what we're looking at. So the house is made of masonry, so like bricks and stuff like that, stone. Masonry also can be marble, things like that, stone, wood, iron, and gold leaf. The sculptures that we're going to see are made of marble and bronze. And then there's a whole set of gardens. You have 5 images. I'm going to quickly show you your 5 images, and then I'll go back and talk about them. So this is one side of the house from sort of the garden area, okay? So, and how do you recognize it? It's this bank of windows. This is how you know it's Versailles, this bank of windows right here. All of those windows, so expensive, so expensive. Okay, so that's your first one. Your second image, okay, is the aerial image. People have said it looks like an owl, 2 eyes, the wings, the body, and the tail. I can't disagree with them. That flat front that we just saw is this back part here that looks out on the garden. So this very back edge here is this piece right here. And you can even see the 2 ponds, and now you can see them. They're right there. So that's your second one, your aerial. Look at how giant this building is. Okay. Yes, we have a modern parking lot, but it starts here. It comes up here. It encompasses this whole area. It comes up here and forms this U, comes over here, comes down and gets this whole big square and this arm here, and then this little square too. Okay. It's a giant complex. It's huge. It's huge. What is our next image? Our next image is this portico area where people would be greeted. So when we're looking at it from up above, it's this spot right here. Okay. You can even see how it looks, seems like it's like dirt and concrete, and then see how it's white right there. That is this spot right here. This is where guests would have been met. This is the entrance with the beautiful black and white marble tile in the entrance where people would have been greeted when they came for visits and things like that. Okay. So that's, what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4. This is the most famous room in all of Versailles, the Hall of Mirrors. Okay. And that's right along this wall, right here. Okay. So when you're looking at this wall, you realize that on the opposite side of this wall is that little U-shaped courtyard that holds. So there's the wall looking out on the thing that also has the palace, the Hall of Mirrors, and then here's the U-shaped courtyard. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. No, sorry, 5 is looking out into the garden. This is probably the most famous statue in Versailles. And so here we are looking at the section of Versailles that has the Hall of Mirrors looking back onto Versailles from the garden. Okay. So let's go back to this. So let's talk about it a little bit. All right. So we have Louis Laveau, super important guy because he was sort of the architect to all of the aristocrats in Paris. Mansart takes over when Laveau gets too old to be able to do anything, and Mansart steps in. But that's why I say if you're only going to remember one, remember Laveau because he was really the guy that starts it. So Louis XIV King Louis XIV. Decides that Paris is too crowded. There are too many people. There's too much going on. And he needs a place to get away. And he wants to have a palace outside of Paris. And so what he does is he moves the nobility, the French court, out to Versailles. It's got 700 rooms. It's got so much space. And so he pretty much moves the entire French court out to Versailles. I'm going to switch now from this view to this view so that we can talk about it. So you're looking at, members of the French court living in this building, in this building, in this building, in this building, members of the French court and servants and all kinds of stuff. Okay. It sits on an east-west axis, which means that the sun rises and sets in alignment with the house. It took 21 years to complete this first main section here. This 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, this other stuff back here and here was added later, but 1, 2, 3, 4. It was really meant to emphasize the importance of Louis XIV. Hopefully you know the nickname that Louis XIV had. If you don't, I'm going to teach you. Louis XIV was known as the Sun King. And the reason that he was known as the Sun King is because, well, a couple of reasons. That he was the center of France, and everything would radiate from him. His bedroom audience chamber, from there, everything would radiate from there. And then, because he was the Sun King, everything is gilded with gold. Everything shines with gold. We have lots of statues of Apollo, who is the god of the sun. And so what we have here is sort of a mixture of classical design, like classical Greece, with Baroque. And he wants to try to build this idea of like the classical symmetry. And you definitely see that. Like these are almost identical copies of each other, as are the gardens have the symmetry here and symmetry here. And so we have lots of symmetry. He wants to present himself as being divinely chosen. And he connects himself even back so far as to say not only just the Catholic God, but also connection to Greek and Roman gods too. Huge gardens that he could entertain out in the gardens. We have levels of garden. We have a formal garden here where things grow in certain areas and they're planted in various things. Then we step back here and this is a less formal garden with wooded areas and things like that. Then there's this mile-long canal that would then take you to a place where you could then hunt in the woods. Yes, the man had built a mile-long canal. And so this is really, really over the top. Louis the 14th really wanted to make himself look like a god king, and that is what he accomplished here. Now, the thing with making himself a god king means that, when things go bad in France, not long after this, the monarchy is beheaded. But let's move to the next. I'm going to move. Yeah, let's do this image. So this is your Baroque. Look at all the windows. There are something ridiculous, like 3,000 windows in this building, and windows were expensive. And this many windows is ridiculous because it lets in cold air, it lets in hot air. Windows are hard to insulate properly. We know how to do it now, but we didn't know how to do it then. These are actually doors that would open up onto places to dance and things like that. So you could actually open them up to try to get a cross breeze, but this is in the middle of a portico. Look at the tiling done here. So you would come in on this dirt area, and then your carriage would drop you off at this beautifully clean tiled area, so the ladies wouldn't have to worry about getting their dresses dirty. And those are the ladies that would come from other places. Many of the members of the French court lived here at Versailles. So we come to this, look at the statues of French nobility and important historical figures. We see all the gold on everything, the expense of the marble tiled area. I mean, it is just simply over the top. When we're talking about Baroque, we're talking like over the top decoration. But again, the hint of that classical. I mean, the influence of ancient Greece and Rome is clearly there with the pilasters and the arches and the dormer windows. Okay, so let's go to the next one. Hall of Mirrors. It runs the entire length of that central building, that picture I showed you in the first one. It's 240 feet long. Okay? One side is completely covered in windows. The other side is completely covered in mirrors, so that when the light comes in, it not only comes in, but then also reflects off the mirrors and lights up all that stuff that's gold all over the place. Okay? There are 357 mirrors. Mirrors were incredibly expensive. You thought windows were expensive. Mirrors are even more expensive because mirrors are simply glass with a backing, a silvering on the back that makes them reflective. So it is just ridiculous. All of this stuff has candles. They're now lit with electric lights, but they would have all been candles. And all of these little gold statues down the whole way, all of the chandeliers would have had, it was just all of this light. And it was used as a passageway for Louis to get up from his bedroom, which, hold on, was here on this corner, right? And he would have to pass through the Hall of Mirrors to get to his personal chapel, which was on the other side. Because, of course, when you are the King of France and you want to go worship God, you first have to walk down the hall where you can worship yourself, right? Like that literally is what's being set up here. It was an absolute extravagance that partially resulted in the bankruptcy of France. We see the beautiful barrel vault ceiling. We see the beautiful ceiling beautiful ceiling paintings. In modern eras, it can be used for parties. It can be rented for weddings. It was used to sign the Treaty of Versailles. I mean, important things can still happen here. It is a huge tourist visiting thing. If you go to Paris, it's a day trip from Paris to go to Versailles. I have not yet spent a day. I didn't, when I was in Paris, I didn't want to spend a day going to Versailles. There are days I wish I had and days I'm glad I didn't. I'm torn on the idea. If for no other reason, then I would love to see the gardens. So this is a statue of Apollo. There are several. There's statues all over the place, and many of them are also fountains. And so when you're looking at this complex, you'll see fountains here, you'll see fountains there. And what's crazy is, I know I just sound ridiculous just then, sorry, but what's crazy is they're all classically arranged. They're very harmoniously designed. There are those super, super formal gardens at the front. Then there's wooded gardens further back from the palace. And then there's all of the wooded area far, far back that allows you to hunt once you've gone down the mile-long canal. But the kooky McNutty thing is, this is wild. The fountains, when the king decided to go for a walk, these fountains were not on all the time. When the king, this one I think shoots water from there. When the king decided to go for a walk, the gardeners would come out and they would turn on the fountains when the king was walking. And then when the king left this area and went to a different area of the gardens, this fountain would turn off and the fountain in the next place would turn on. So it was like a magic show. If you walked with the king, when you got to a certain area of the garden, the fountains would come on. And when he left, the fountains would turn off. Here you see the fleur-de-lis implied here. And again, we see this sort of radial symmetry of the over-the-top Palace of Versailles. Ridiculous. Okay, guys, guess what? We made it to the end of Baroque. This one is called Fruit and Insects, and it has taken us until 1711 to have our first female artist. And here's another place where I argue with the College Board. There are many places that they could have put in other female artists that are wildly important. The fact that they chose to start here with Rachel Rausch is, okay, I get Rachel Rausch is kind of important, but there were other female artists ahead of her that they probably should have included, particularly, and I'm just going to say this, if you don't know who Artemisia Gentileschi is, you need to look her up. She was a Baroque painter. She is probably one of the most famous women painters prior to the 1800s. And the fact that they chose Rachel Rausch instead of Artemisia Gentileschi, I find incredibly offensive. So I would highly recommend that you go look up something about Artemisia Gentileschi. Moving on, Rachel Rausch. I'm sorry, it's Rausch, not Rausch. Oil on wood. She returns to wood because it's a smaller piece. It's only 17 by 24. She was very successful in her life from her early teens all the way up until she was in her 80s. At the time that she painted, she was painting just a little bit after Rembrandt. And at the time she painted, she was actually more popular than Rembrandt and selling for twice what he did. She focused on still lifes, which is something that we return to in our upcoming time periods. We return to the concept of still lifes. And what's interesting is she painted again for the merchant class, and her stuff has some symbolism in it as well. She was Dutch, and she was known for sort of doing what are called composite pieces. So what do I mean by that? So what you're looking at is a group of fruits and insects that would not all have been able to be present at the same time. What you see here is she has chosen to get across a certain imagery, and she has chosen the fruit and insects that she wants to show, and it doesn't matter whether they are all if they all can be harvested at the same time. She was focusing really on symbolism and color. So we see symbols of the harvest. We see corn and squash and chestnuts, but we also see wheat and grapes. I'm hoping that this is popping in your head and you're like, hold on, wait a second. Wheat and grapes, isn't that religious symbolism? Yes. Wheat for the bread and grapes for the wine at Mass. So we have that focus on that subtle symbolism. Okay. We do also have your color harmony, lots of reds and greens, your grapes, your plums, your peaches, your nectarines, the squashes. She's looking at colors, and she's focusing on what the composition looks like, and how she can paint it, versus worrying about gathering things that would all be able to be harvested at the same time. So why does she do this, or more importantly, how does she do this? Because her father actually studied. Uh, Her father was a scientist, and he collected bugs. So I'm going to zoom in so that you can see some of this cool stuff that's here. And so what she was able to do was she was able to look at the pieces from his collection and paint them into her pieces. And I want you to sort of look at this. She would have studied the things from her father's collection. He also collected flowers. And so what she does is she shows sort of this interest in the scientific and the natural world in a way that is very artistic. The microscope is becoming popular. Science is becoming popular. I knew that I would come up with those words eventually. Her father was a scientist. He was a botanist, so he studied plants and stuff like that. And her grandfather was an architect. And so she sort of comes to this idea of plants and animals and paint and art all together at the same time. So her artwork is very scientific, but also has that underlying symbolisms, because here's our wheat, here's our grapes, okay, bread and wine. Here is our eggs, life, but here are flies, which are often seen as being harbingers of death. Okay, so life and death and rebirth and that kind of thing. And so what you see here is she is still doing that symbolism, but she's doing that symbolism on just a very different, in a different way, and with a different group of things. Instead of like the symbolism of Vermeer, who has all that really more specific religious symbolism, Ruysch's symbolism is a little more subtle and hints at the coming interest in science. And that's probably why they selected her. It just makes me mad they didn't select Artemisia Gentileschi. But what Ruysch does is Ruysch helps us jump that chasm between art and science. They used to be two different things, and Ruysch begins to bring them together as one thing, which we will see happen in a later art period called the neoclassical. But she is able to really bring those together and include art and science. She was incredibly talented, and you can see that with the glinting of the light off of the grapes. You can see that in the shadow down here of this butterfly. The shadow of that butterfly is wildly impressive. It's so good. You can see it with the fuzz on the chestnut. She was incredibly detailed, and look at the white lines on the beetle that allow it to be slightly reflective. She was able to, I'm sorry for that alarm. She was able to take that that attention to detail and the scientific boom and apply it to her art. And so she is our last piece in Baroque. I will see you next time for early colonial. And I hope that you enjoyed Baroque as much as I do. And I'll see you next time. Have a good one.